completely unrelated opening titles.
Previously on XMen. Yeah.
Hey. Yeah.
We're here to celebrate not only one of the most beloved shows in the history of animated television, but also the publication of this landmark book that honors the skill and dedication of those who made it. And we have four of those people here with us today. Leading our discussion, we have the showrunner of XMen the Animated Series, Eric Lincoln. We also have one of my favorite XMen series writers of stories such as Days of Future Past and Beauty and the Beast, Julia Lee. Also joining us is the head artist and producer-director for the series, Larry Houston.
Nice.
If you appreciate character design work for the show, you'll be happy to meet the gentleman who gave the final polish for 4 years worth of them. That's Mark Lewis. Eric and Julia, I was hoping you could kick things off with just painting a picture of what was it like in 1992 animated television and Marvel.
Yeah, well, when we all got hired in February 1992, we quickly looked to see what's Marvel done since the 60s on TV. And Marvel wasn't terribly happy with it, and we weren't all that thrilled with it. And compared to what the 1992 books were, which we thought, wow, these are really intense. This stuff's adult, this stuff's gripping, this stuff's compelling, and not what had been, on Saturday morning up to that point. So, yeah. So there's some early attempts. You don't wonder why Marvel was a little suspicious about Hollywood taking one of their premier book and turning it into a show. They were obviously thrilled to get the fee, but they didn't know. They hadn't worked with us before. They worked with Larry and Julia, who was the main guy with him, and they were just kind of hoping that we didn't bring in, a toy robot or a goofy dog or whatever. And believe me, there were suggestions when we first started. Oh, why don't you do a real simple thing like, have Professor X and some people go around in a van with a dog and find a mutant each week. Yeah. Luckily, people like Larry and Will knew the book so well. Said, no, this is we're respecting the book.
He's not kidding. That's what they want.
You had the books, but you had also worked on the previous attempt, the
Pride.
Yeah, we had working with Will and Rick Holbert. We did a Pride of the X-Men back in the mid-'80s, trying to get interest made to do the X-Men way back when. It was only 3 networks. If you didn't sell it to the 3 networks, that's it. And so we did Pride of the X-Men. We got a really good Japanese tutor to the word. Will did Act 1, Holbert did Act 2, and I did Act 3, trying to put our best foot forward to get something out there. But there wasn't any interest, and we had, unfortunately, have to live with this forever. We did a lot of compromises. Wolverine became Australian. I have to live that down.
But why did he become Australian?
The guys with the money said, look, Crocodile Dundee is pretty popular right now. And we said, okay, but we amongst ourselves, we knew if we get a series, it's gonna change our back. We just want to get it on the air and use it as a sales tool. And so, yeah, I have to look at that, all of us. Wherever now.
Were there aspects of the pilot, though, that you took forward into the series that you were confident about?
Yeah, I mean, we, after depicting the characters as much as we did back then, I mean, they reused the assets for the Capcom game, I think. But we got a better understanding of the group dynamics at the time. And also, for me, I discovered Storm, because we used the original costume that Dave Cochran had designed, the black costume, but I discovered when she used her powers and make the sky dark, she kind of like disappeared, you know, value-wise. And you had to add, you know, like a lighting or lighting effects behind it to pop up the screen. Sorry. So when we get the next series, I went for the white costume that Jim Lee designed. That's the reason behind it. It's more production reason for that change that I discovered from doing this series.
Well, a few years later, and it's a bit of a different landscape when executives and government are pitching to have the show. So you want to talk a little bit about how that piece together?
Yeah, well, back when we did the pilot, you know, prior to the X-Men, the one executive that was behind it is, I call the unseen superhero, Margaret Lesh over there. And she was behind the original pilot, but it didn't sell. And so you imagine, fast forward about 6 years later, she became the CEO of Fox Kids Network. And she had the power to greenlight the show. So she gave a call to all of us, Eric, Julia, me, Will, to get out there and said, we're gonna do the show and get the show in the air. She and Sydney were the ones that were like charging forward to get it on the air, despite a lot of the other executives weren't that really sure about whether or not it was gonna work or not. Because you gotta remember back then, a successful show was either Scooby-Doo or Super Friends. I mean, what we were doing is totally different.
And Margaret's boss, the actual president of Fox Network, looked at the scripts we were starting to hand in and said, what is this? Are you serious, Margaret? You think kids will watch this stuff? I said, I don't get it. And she said, I do. It's why you willing to risk your career on this, because you're putting a lot of our assets into this show to be your first big, well, we got it. And I just don't see it working. And she said, yeah, it doesn't work. Fire me, I'm done. And that was that level of commitment from her that got it on the air in the first place.
Yeah.
And then Sydney, who is her crazy right-hand man. Margaret ran the whole network. She had like a dozen shows on the air. Sydney was the field general. He was hands-on. Every script I wrote was a 6-hour phone call with Sydney. I don't know if Wolverine would say that. No. And then every time a storyboard came out, he'd be calling Larry. And, I don't know yet. And so Julie had to buy me a headset. Just to deal with this, because he cared so much about this. And I don't know where he got the hours in the day, because he supervised Batman and Spider-Man and us and the Tick. His sensibility pervades the shows you watched as a kid. And if it had been somebody else who was our boss, we just would have been stuck. Yeah. We would have had to do, we would have had to please them instead of pleasing the maniac. Yeah. And we got the maniac.
We got the maniac, yeah. Is there an A.B. Cole slide there?
Oh, no, but you don't have an A.B. But there's also, there's a wonderful, Julie can tell you about it, a wonderful censor.
Yeah. That's the first time you'll ever hear that.
And maybe the only time. But in children's programming, there are a lot of sort of hurdles and safety nets and things put up that have to be navigated for everything that goes on the air. And in 1992, in the Wayback Machine, friends, there was no internet, there were no cell phones. If you were going to watch a show, it was going to be on a TV set, and unless your parents had a VCR, you're going to have to watch it when it came on. There were very stringent rules about what could play on a children's show. And X-Men being on Fox Kids, that's what it was. It was considered a kid's show.
Yeah.
And the person with the absolute power, not Margaret Lesh, not even her boss, but the person with absolute power was the broadcast standards and practices person. And Fox Kids, it was a woman named Avery Coburn. And honest to God, if it had been anybody else, I don't know how any of us would have gotten that paid.
They would have stopped so much.
She understood the books.
Yeah, anybody else there was like, does Wolverine have to have the claws? That was the first question we had. But Avery actually, she came from prime time, so she had a little bit more of an adult sensibility, which is a great gift to us. But B, she actually read and liked the books. So she understood what the stories were about. She understood why we might have to kill somebody in the first story, why we might have to do a show about religion, why, because she knew the characters and she knew the books, and so she wouldn't have done these things on another show, but for us, for X-Men, she bent the wheels.
But we were really lucky to get her to oversee our series, otherwise we would have worked with several that you would be, oh man.
Well, I think you were especially lucky because it was less than 7 months between that green light meeting and the pilot ends up on the air.
Oh yeah.
Ends up being a #1 hit, and it was just clear sailing.
Yeah.
No challenges.
No. Yeah, but the next part was, Eric's right. During that 7 or 8 months while things are being animated, everybody's worried, all your money's at stake, most shows fail, they're second guessing each other and us. And all that stopped the day it came on and was successful. So you guys made our lives easier for the next 4 years. We still had new shows, but we weren't getting voices in our ears saying, we could really change this and have it be something very different. No, it's good, we're set, and the next 4 years were easier.
Yeah, and I was totally surprised that, they put on our show, Halloween night, October 31st. I'm going, oh man, the variants. We're going to see the show, and it's like, the ratings were through the roof. You guys really saved us.
It was, but also there was I remember hearing there was a point before the show here in development where Stan Lee was saying, we sort of prophesying doom and gloom unless it was the original X-Men from 1964 and not the current team.
Well, yeah, because he wasn't familiar.
Right.
He had no idea who he had been out of touch, out of publishing for such a long time. The only characters he knew was like Scott and Jean and Beast. He didn't know the other characters.
Well, that actually brings up a good point, is that in adaptation, it's often as much what you're not picking up as what you choose to pick up. So, talk a little bit about how you zeroed in, came around to the series on a whole, what thinking went into what the show is going to be from a story and character perspective.
That's really interesting because, to be honest, Mark and I he worked on at least 30 of the shows, and he helped me lay out the first 2 seasons, the first 26, while doing 10 other jobs. Old friends from college, but we both were fairly new to the books. I mean, Larry had them memorized. A lot of the artists did. Yeah, thank God, because so we had walking, living encyclopedias about the books to us, but we were just kind of thrown in the deep end and said, okay, here's 25 years and 5 years of reprints of X-Men books, 1963, 1992. Where do you start? There are like 5,000 stories you can tell, and you can start with 13. Where do you start? So, in our minds, the things that grabbed us as just lovers of say heroic storytelling, and action films, and westerns and war films and historic epics, we saw the X-Men dropped into this tragic situation of being different and special and hated for it, despite the fact that it was not of their doing, which is very much a great tragedy. So we saw that. We saw a lot of spectacle, a lot of meeting fights, like who's going to be who? Can he take Gladiator? No, I can. The WWE side of the books was very much fun, and it's very much in our stories. But the thing that sparked to us was the human stories of the characters. And that's why we kept on meeting, old girlfriends of Wolverines, and just family members, and so that the personal dramas were what meant to us, especially since, remember, we're a kids show, we couldn't show half as much, say, intensity and violence and adult action as the books could. Comic books were full of people ripping the hell out of each other, and we just had to do it with emotions. We had to do it with people breaking each other's hearts, or betraying each other, or forgiving each other. And so those was, of all the hundreds and hundreds of books that Larry helped, helped us get a sense of. We picked and chose what we could out of those stories that would fit, and also that would fit a Saturday morning, a television show. That, right, I couldn't write a good comic book, maybe after a couple months of learning the craft, but there are specific, the stories are much more linear on TV. You know, if your comic book, you have 11 characters, each with a thought bubble and each saying something in one big double page. And you can't do that in a TV show, so you have to think in terms of the linear stories. And Mark and I both were attracted to this, what is the nature of mutiny as it evolves, as it tries to live with the larger human culture around it. And that helped us narrow down from the thousands of choices to dozens of choices.
Well, I happen to know that you, Mark, and Julie are trackers. What in your approach was informed by your Star Trek?
What was your choice?
I grew up in Texas, and at a time way pre-internet, and Star Trek to me was that thing that the shiny city on the hill on Channel 39, the UHF channel, would get the Star Trek original series reruns, and that became my window into this amazing universe of what television could do, what science fiction could do, what all this stuff could do, and that informed a lot of my own love for just the genre, just anything about that, the humanity of the stories in this crazy, wild, big science fiction world. Then to get a chance, making a conscious decision to come out to California and try my luck at things. Again, look at it's a team. They are very distinct people. You could say a line, and each one of them, you would hear who it was, and you would know if it was the wrong person saying it. It's that distinct. Those kinds of moments were the things that all the pieces coming together to realize that in a way the XMen team had the same kind of components, the same, in spite of or because of the humanity of the UBC, they had the humanity. They had the family friendship, they had the found family feeling they had, and they each had their own responsibilities in the team, not unlike Star Trek, and they would each come to conflict all the time for that.
Mark, were we including you in it?
Oh, no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant Mark.
sorry.
No, that's true. The other writer and I, we knew we'd each watched the entire series, the Star Trek series 6 times, and so constantly quoting things to each other. And I need that third alternative from Captain Kirk. And just having the dynamics of the relationship, knew what Bones thought about Kirk and what Kirk thought about Spock. All those people, they were a lived-in family, and it was compelling. We tried to set up that kind of family with the XMen.
It also informs a bit of a departure, one of the biggest departures from pre-92 Marvel animation, which is treating the characters as adults. You know, adult stories for an adult audience, where they're not dumbing things down intentionally for a supposed children's audience that needs to have that done to them.
And the strength of the stories were that when we saw it at the demographic we were shooting for, at your young age, you saw all the laser beams and explosions and initially, but a lot of the adult subtext that they were writing for didn't come about until you got a little bit older, and then you started recognizing what you guys had put into the show. It wasn't in your face, but it was there in the stories. So that's one of the strengths of the series, is that instead of writing down the kids, we were writing up the kids, that you guys would catch up to it on subsequent reruns and stuff.
Well, dovetailing with that, I think that the praises are often sung for the adaptations of the comic storylines, but there are actually a fair number of original stories developed for and aired in the animated series. And do you want to talk a little bit about, I think one of the best episodes, Beauty and the Beast, how that came about?
Part of the, going back and remembering when Aaron was charged with developing the show for TV, you were given 13 episodes. and I was a writer on one of those episodes, but we were all told you have 13 episodes. We're gonna assume it's gonna fail, so write your best episodes and go out and prosper somewhere else. So after those first 13, you and Mark had crafted those first 13 to be the best, strongest stories possible to introduce the world to the team of the X-Men. Then as second season happened and it's like, hey, it's a hit, come back. Yeah. Then sitting down and coming up with stories that felt like they were integral to the character. And with this one, as much as we all identify with different characters on the X-Men team, Beast himself is, as a writer, he's the favorite because you get to be the smartest person in the room when you write for Beast, because he is the smartest person in the room. But also, he of all of them is the most other. And if he were to walk down the street, he's someone that would get pointed at, perhaps. And realizing that he also among the X-Men is perhaps the most comfortable, most aware, most able to be in his skin, and then to give him the challenge of what the world can be like when it's really nasty, really ugly, and when he is allowed to fall in love. So that's how that episode of Beauty and the Beast came to be. And again, it ends on the heart-wrenching note where Carly's father is an avowed member of the Friends of Humanity, and ugly things happen as a result of that. I like to think that at some point in the future, Carly and Beast can get together again. I'm holding out hope. I'm holding out hope.
The Charlie Chaplin reference in there was when Julie came up with this idea. We did a lot of this in the show. You get a tiny spark of something from the movies like It's a Wonderful Life or a Star Trek episode, and you think about, oh, One Man's Worth. Going back in time, if one person wasn't there, how would that affect the world? Okay, so you're stealing a little. You're stealing a little here from City Lights. There's we could do it like City. But Julie said we could do like a City Lights episode with Beast where there's someone blind and she's about to get her sight back and he's suddenly self-conscious. And that little bit is where the story grew from. And Beast was the one character we could do this with because it fit him so perfect.
Can you speak a bit then to the kind of different discipline that goes into direct adaptation from an existing source versus the original story? Like for Days of Future Past.
There was a certain arrogance of ignorance going into this one. This is a crown jewel in the X-Men story universe. I mean, Chris Claremont's, it's astonishing that we were allowed to adapt that in the first 13, again, thinking it was only going to be 13 episodes. And then, oh, but you can't use Kitty Pryde. Oh, okay, all right. Okay, yeah. You're going to use someone else. It's going to be Bishop, and he's going to be a time traveler. Oh, okay. You know, because in animation, some of the rules are trying to convey a mental mind shift. Right. Was like with Kitty Pryde, the original, was going to be harder to play because the way animation played out. So with the strictures, what we had to do to tell a story, this is kind of how it came to be. And you can look up there that it's called future tense because we didn't know they were going to give us their blessing right up until that we could call it Days of Future Past, parts 1 and 2, because it was going to be a departure. But they understood at Marvel, fortunately. Yeah. And we were there to guide us all in terms of how to make these characters work in this world.
Yeah, that drawing up is actually Will Migos. When we got the final script, Will wanted to do that opening himself, so he took the first act of and set up the pacing for the rest of the series. That episode.
Yeah, and from what Eric said about making the adaptations, people say, "Oh, great! Now you get to do the Phoenix Saga." Well, then you sit down and you look at the 14 comic books. There's 5 stories going on in the Phoenix Saga. And that was very much a Chris Claremont thing. He'd get one string started, and then start another one, and start another one. All these different groups of characters, and we got back from one to the other. And we were warned that it would be hard to keep track just of our normal size cast. And so one of the big things in making these adaptations is a little bit of simplifying and streamlining to try to focus on somebody. Like we focused on Scott a little more for his point of view than Phoenix because it's happening to Jean. Also in Dark Phoenix, we focus a little more on Scott's POV rather than all these secondary characters, which were parts of the book. So, like job one, this one, the previous one was a little more straightforward, but like in the Phoenix Saga, job one was to decide which 70% of those books you weren't going to use, and what was the centerpiece from beginning to end that the audience could follow over 5 days, and where they kind of remember what they saw in that first one. But simplification and streamlining is a lot of that addiction process for us.
Well, you had a decent amount of help from hardcore comics fans and the main visual architects for the show, which was Will Minniam and Harry. Larry, do you want to speak a little bit about how you came into art through comics and maybe what influenced or inspired your own visual style and animation?
Well, for me, I've been a lifelong comic book geek, buying books since in the 60s, showing you my age. I've been an XMen fan, DC fan, but mainly Marvel, way back when. My influences artistically have been like Jack Kirby, John Buscema, Gail Kane, Gene Colan, people like that in comic books. So I just devoured their artwork most of all my life. And then when I got to get into animation, there's a director from Japan named Hayao Miyazaki, and when his work started coming into America about in the early 80s, and I was working at Filmation at the time, when we would just devour his stuff as we saw it. And those are probably my earliest influences in terms of art and also being a cinema. And so using anime that was coming into America, I was able to like kind of blend the two. And so I applied it to like G.I. Joe, The Hulk, all the shows I was working on, and I was finally able to really have it come together when I did the XMen series, because we finally got it on the air and gonna get it done, and we had no budget and no time, as he knows. And so suddenly all of that training, and I had to apply it to the show to make it as efficient, to get the best scripts, get the best board guys, do all the corrections, and ship it off. And I think it was like 9 weeks from getting from him to get it out the door. And we literally I had no time. I had one pass at everything to try and fix anything. And after that, gave it to him, gave it to the time directors, and it's gone. So it was quick.
Yeah, I tell you, and the advantage of how terribly quick it was, which what we all felt, was there was no time for second guessing. Larry said, okay, these are my best drawings, and for me it was like, I think this is the best the story can be. Let's not mull it over 8 or 20 times and get everybody else's idea and try to, it's just, here, done, here, done, here, done. And yeah, that just, it was very satisfying. It was like competition. You never stop focusing because you knew you didn't have extra minutes. Up there, the middle one is Larry's own book. And the right is Filmation, where he got started.
Yeah.
Before Hanna-Barbera and then Marvel. Did you ever work for Hanna-Barbera?
Almost for freelance, yeah. I did a lot of freelance.
Oh, God, there's Adventures of Johnny Quest.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah.
For X-Men specifically, the first work that was done on the design front is the character design, as you're figuring out who your main cast is going to be. But you have what could be seen as a little bit of attention going back to the 75 to the 85 Claremont run.
Right.
But then you also have the previous year, the Claremont and Jim Lee book sells like 8 million copies, so they must be saying like this is really hot, it's popular. How do you make it work for animation? Can you tell me a little bit about how we go through some of Will's first designs into your color models?
Yeah, well, between the initial character designs were really built around early video sketches and refinement with Rick Holberg and Mark over here. Well, the first, I guess.
Yeah, second
season. And so it was a lot of between the two of those guys. I did some work on it too, but we were trying to nail down the characters. And you gotta remember, if we can nail a that once you do this, you have front, back, 3/4 left, 3/4 right, and profile. So we had to do a lot of drawings. Once we nailed down one view, there were a lot more drawings that had to be created so that the animators knew how to turn the characters. But it was mainly those guys. But the style that, like we did, the three of us, Will, Rick, and myself, we did the pilot too. We did Pride of the XMen. And back then, the artist that was popular was Dave Conklin. And then when we got a shot to do this one, it was Jim Lee. And so we took Jim and just translated stuff into something that could be animated. And my thing was like, I wanted to try and keep the uniforms and outfits as detailed as possible. And so, but simplified, because you're gonna have dozens and dozens of artists trying to replicate it. And if you have too many lines, it's gonna hurt, face will go like this, eyes kind of pop over here. So you had to, it was like a medium compromise in how to make the artwork.
We probably still have a lot of animators overseas cursing us.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's even simplified, there's still a lot of damn lines in these characters, But we hit what I believe was a compromise.
Once you're into actual production, as a storyboarder, you have the opportunity to kind of expand on tweaking scripts a little bit. And one thing that you're well known for is introducing some first appearances and Marvel cameos into the show.
Yeah, back the genesis of it started when I was a little kid reading the books back in the '60s. Stan would add a cameo of Thor and Spider-Man, and then he'd have a little footnote. We want to see what Thor's going, buy this issue. He was like cross-promoting. I remembered as a kid, so it excited me. So when I got the chance to do this stuff, I wanted to put in little Easter eggs for the fans to try and get, like, impart that same enthusiasm I had for the audience. But when I first did it, they said, I tried to put Spider-Man in. They said, no. Even though he was on the same note, they said no. Later on, these guys wrote an episode called Slave Island.
Yeah.
And they had mutant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I brought in my comic books. There was no internet. Put it on the Xerox machine, make copies for everyone to draw. And I said, okay, make this blob, make this snake, make this sunfire. I populated with the characters that already existed. And I submitted it. I didn't hear anything. So, cool, okay, I don't know what the system is.
Because we didn't label necessarily who they were.
Right.
The legal department wouldn't necessarily know, but fans would know right away.
Yeah, so it's like all those characters were still mutant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Right.
They didn't have their real names.
So, we ended up doing the first appearance in animation anywhere of Black Panther, only he was listed on the model sheet as, I think, African mutant number 3.
And these are some of your co-conspirators?
Yes.
Yeah, this is a big chunk of the crew here. This photo just recently came into my hands courtesy of Vic Gialcelli, who also did some boards on the show. But yeah, you got Larry and myself there in the background. And then in the front row, it's Xiaoping Wei, who was our BG layout guy for a good long time. And he eventually went over to DreamWorks Feature and became a mainstay over there. Working, he started off on Prince of Egypt, and yeah, he did a bunch of stuff over there. Then next to him is Marcus Borregales, who was our prop guy. He ended up, I think, getting into gaming, where I think he still is. And then that's Frank Sculacci, who was Larry's assistant. And then when Larry left to go work on Fantastic Four, Frank stepped up and took over for Larry. So
yeah, he did season 5 for me.
And I understand this is your...
Yeah, the Mr. Sinister turns were not actually done for production. That was when I interviewed for the job. They said that they saw some comic book style stuff in my portfolio, which is kind of where I was headed, and they were saying that's kind of the look that they wanted. So they had given me some Xeroxes of some stuff to do as a test, and not knowing how it was done in animation, I took the Xerox, literally light boxed it onto a piece of Bristol board like they use in comics, and inked it with Pro Quills and Indian ink and the whole thing. So when I turned it in, Stephanie Graziano, who had originally interviewed me, was like, "Oh, yeah, this didn't need to be this complicated, but it looks good. They paid me for the test and they hired me, so.
Yeah.
And would you mind telling us a little bit more about the role a cleanup artist plays in overall production and how that helps the animators?
It's a lot like, if you understand how things work in comics, it's a lot like what the inker does in comics. A good inker will take the initial rough drawing that the penciler does, and there might be like 2 or 3 sketch lines, and they'll clean it up so that there's only 1 line. And I also had a tendency when I would do this stuff to put weights on the line, like a comic book would. Even though I knew that wasn't going to show up in the final product, I just felt like it helped to give a sense of weight and to help the animators and everybody looking at the drawing understand what the structure was and the lighting and all of those things. And nobody disagreed with that, so I just kept doing it.
Right. Now, you notice that like on the previous drawing with Sinister and these guys, can you imagine animating that guy just walking across the room? So, one of the approaches I did with Sinister is that on the storyboards, I want to keep the accuracy of the costume, but I can't let this guy move. So I approached him more like Dracula. So he would come into a room and he would be in deep, you wouldn't even see him. You'd see him animate out of shadow, but maybe just, from the chest up. And then he would have a conversation with someone, and when you cut back, he's over here. And then when you conversation with he's over there, and at the end he'd have this maniacal laugh, and he would just drift back. Save money, and yeah, the anime saved their lives, and they probably would kill me if that's stuff. I tried. Yeah, because a lot of times in the storyboards, the animators, storyboard artists would draw it as if it's a regular show. It's like, no, I would just take those panels out and restage it the way I just said, so that it wouldn't kill the animators to do that. Like, even on that one right there, you can see all the stuff that's going on. It's like, oh, we didn't have a Disney budget. So, we just limited this. Yeah.
Well, and Mark, your tendency to go above and beyond unbidden may have informed what we're seeing here.
Yeah, no, this was kind of later on. This was after Larry was gone. Time moves on, right? And so in the comics, at this point in time, Jim Lee had long since left Marvel Comics to go be a co-founder at Image. And the look in the comics at this point now was Joe Madureira. And Frank Squillace and myself, Frank was kind of taken over to Larry. We sort of felt like, maybe it's time to freshen up the look of the show a little bit. And we kind of felt like, going with the Joe Madureira look would be a little more animation friendly, maybe. So we did a series of designs of different characters kind of in that vein, and that's what these were here. And we had a lot of people in the studio who were really excited about it. Will Mineo had come back to the studio because he'd been off at Universal doing other things like Exo Squad for a while. And he wasn't directly involved with X-Men at that point, but he still kind of had a paternal interest, shall we say, in the show and what was going on. So he pulled me and Frank in, and he's like, I've seen what you guys are doing. I think this is really great. It's a great idea, and I'm fully on board with it. But as these things happen, it didn't happen, But it was kind of fun to work on these things, and a lot of people did like what we were doing. So.
Thanks. We wanted to leave some time for audience questions. If you have them, feel free to fire away.
You guys X-Men hat?